Welcome back to another awesome episode in our colonization series. Today, we're going to be expanding our renewable lumber industry, and that's going to entail taking all this lumber, turning it into ethanol, and then running that ethanol through petroleum generators. Soon, power is not going to be a problem for this colony. And since we have a couple of large construction projects in front of us, I figured we might need some help. Additionally, we keep climbing in the calorie count. This is normally a good thing, except occasionally food has gone off because we haven't eaten it quick enough. So what better time than now to pick up a couple new duplicates? Now, I had been keeping an eye on the printing pod for a little bit until I came across this Steve. This Steve is a plus 15 to science to start, and they're a quick learner. Now, their big negative is they are a mouth breather, but quite frankly, for 15 science and quick learning, we'll make do just fine. Welcome to duplicate number 8, Patrick Gordon. Of course, Patrick Gordon is going to go into research. We also have John Archer, who's a pretty good scientist themselves, but it's always beneficial to have at least 2 sciences, especially on your primary colony. And since we're at it, why don't we also defrost our friend here? John Mann is doing the honors now. And we got a wonderful new Devon. Now this Devon of course starts off with the motivated by friend buff, which is huge, but taking a closer look at it, they are a shabby dresser and germ resistant, and their personal interests include researching. It looks like we're going to end up with 3 duplicates that can do some research, which this isn't too bad, but it's definitely not something we would have opted in for. Maybe we should have defrosted the friend before we went to the printing pod for the dupe. Without further ado, welcome to dupe number 9, Allison Honeywell. Now, as we start the power side of our lumber industry, I wanted to explain a couple things behind the numbers. We ended up going with 10 full arbor trees, which, as you may remember from the last episode, is 700 kilos worth of polluted water. Now, this cool slush geyser in and of itself only produces 852 kilos per cycle. This isn't too bad, except the duplicates here are also living off that polluted water. But eventually, we will be tapping into this saltwater geyser that has a monstrous output of almost 1,800 kilos per cycle. So initially, we might be using a little bit more polluted water from over on Frostine, but that's also going to be mitigated by the fact that we have a lot of polluted water here to use up first as well. And not to mention the fact that our petroleum generators will also be producing polluted water that we'll be able to throw right back into this system. But the opportunity that 10 arbor trees gives us means that we can actually throw in more ethanol distilleries. Remember, it takes 7.2 domestically growing arbor trees to support 4 ethanol distilleries. But we're also raising these arbor trees inside of pip ranches. We also need to take into account that each pip will consume 0.08 of a domesticated arbor tree in order to keep it well fed. So an entire stable worth of pip will take 0.64 of an arbor tree. Hence the reason we have added a 5th arbor tree to each stable, which only gives us about an arbor tree to an arbor tree and a half in excess lumber if we were going to start with only 4 ethanol distilleries. So when we do build the ethanol distilleries, I think we're going to go with 6 total, and that way we can account for some of the excess lumber. Now, when I was deciding where I was going to build the lumber industry out, I was thinking that we'd throw it in with these volcanoes. The issue is these volcanoes are going to cause that room to go above the boiling point of polluted water on occasion, and we don't want that to happen. So I think we're going to keep these volcanoes separate from our petroleum generators and ethanol distilleries. And I'm using these insulated tiles that are eventually going to encapsulate all 3 of these volcanoes as sort of our border. So we need to put the entire lumber industry into about this point here. Over on Frostine, things are going just fine and dandy. We've managed to get this pool up to about 17 degrees, which means it's not going to cause a problem with this water sieve when it converts from polluted water to regular water and then bursting in the pipes because it's below 0 degrees. This means it is arbor tree ready once it hits the other colony. Now eventually we may take this polluted water process out and warm it up over here in our lumber industry, but for now this liquid tepidizer works just fine. Now it was definitely a pain running the liquid tepidizer, which takes 960 watts off of very limited power generation, but now that it's sufficiently warm, it only has to run every once in a while because the liquid tepidizer is just that good. We also received a great recommendation that instead of putting this hydrogen generator and battery in a box, why don't we just put it in here? It'll help keep this polluted water warm and allow us to concentrate where we're doing that sort of temperature control. So we'll be working on that here in the background as well. Now, in order to make petroleum generators, we're going to need a little bit of steel. And by a little bit, I mean a few tons. The difficult part of making your first metal refinery to get into steel is typically power. Right now we're running off of a bunch of 2-strand wire and, well, I don't think that's really going to cut it for metal refinery work. So I think it's about time to tap into this natural gas geyser, and then we can use the natural gas geyser and start setting up a proper power brick that can then run the metal refinery. We're also clearing this area out because I think this is where our temporary metal refinery station's going to go. It's nice and chilly over here. We'll be able to use this water, then recycle it a few times, and we already have a liquid pump over here, so I think it's going to work out just fine. Now, in order to get into this, we've put sort of a pathetic liquid lock in here in the hopes that it'll hold and keep all this natural gas where it belongs. So we're just going to break in just like this with the aims of installing this sort of structure here. Now we're going to have to start with the metal refinery because we're going to need a steel gas pump to put in here, but this at least gets us started. Now it'd be great to build the metal refinery out of ceramic, so we're going to throw down a couple of kilns. Additionally, we're going to need that refined carbon anyways for the steel. Now right now we have 86.7 tons of coal. There's probably more on here and there's probably more on Frostine, but that won't be our permanent coal supply. What we're probably going to end up doing is throwing a sage hatch or two into these pip ranches, and that way the sage hatches will eat some of the dirt being produced by the pips and turn it into coal. Remember, each stable's worth of trees only require 50 kilos per cycle, whereas 7 pips are going to produce 140 kilos of dirt per cycle. So if we do some dirt shoveling around and put, say, 1 sage hatch here, we'd be able to give it all the dirt being produced by these pips and these pips, not counting the dirt that the trees need to create the additional coal we need for refined carbon. Like I said, that's a ways off into the future because we have plenty of coal right now to start off with. So here's the beginning mess of what we're going to be doing to create that steel. The power is going to be temporarily provided by a few coal generators and then fed directly into the metal refinery. We're going to need a battery here, but I'm still waiting for some more refined metal. As for the coolant, it's going to come from this liquid pump that is feeding our trees. Some of the water is going to come over here into the metal refinery and then get dumped right back in here at the far side of this little pond. Now eventually we're going to be putting the natural gas generator in here, which is going to create a lot of carbon dioxide. So we're starting the long run of building a ladder all the way to space to dump all that carbon dioxide. The rest of the polluted water, though, is just going to drop down into here, and it will start heating this whole pool up, but we'll worry about that when we get to it. Now over on Frostine, we're getting some idle messages, so I think we're going to start the process of putting in proper bathrooms, and we need to figure out some temperature issues here with the meal ice. This polluted water is coming out at around 13°C, so I think we can dump some of that heat into this atmosphere just to keep these mealwood growing. And it just so happens this colony has beautiful aluminum, and that makes everything nice, because aluminum has that very high thermal conductivity. So here's their beautiful new bathroom setup. It's conveniently located next to their bedrooms, and one of the cool features is the polluted water being used by the bathrooms is actually joining up and going to be fed to the arbor trees. And the fresh water is coming from the same water sieve that provides the water supply for the electrolyzers. So we actually don't need a sort of system with its own independent water sieve. Now I'm going to have to pay attention to the flow to make sure that it's using enough polluted water to where these don't back up. It should be fine, but I'll keep an eye on it. But while we're doing that, J-Ray and his designer Citrus Spandex decided to entomb themselves. We're sort of expanding this out, that way I could put a couple of bottle emptiers and the such in here, and, you know, things happen. We'll just deconstruct the tile, and hopefully the sort of ray gun didn't hurt J-Ray too much. It's always good to start off on the right foot. We have everything just about done. We finally refined enough metal to where we have the smart battery, all the automation in. We have the auto sweeper handling the coal delivery. The only issue is oxygen is at a premium here. So instead of having the duplicants suffocate, then having to run away and then come back to continue the metal refinery work, I think we're going to put in a temporary oxygen diffuser down here. We have a little bit of algae that we were never going to use anyways, so this will sort of work out perfect. In fact, I'm going to move it over just a little bit, and that way we can also add some storage bins to automate this process. All we'll need is another couple of auto sweepers. This will be perfect. One will hold algae, and the other storage bins will hold different metals and components. This auto sweeper here has the benefit of being able to get to all the refined carbon. We'll throw some lime and some iron in here as well. Now the issue that I have to promise myself is I normally put in one of these temporary industrial areas, and the temporary ends up being 400 or 500 cycles. We won't do it this time. In fact, I don't think we're going to have an option because we don't have a lot of cold polluted water here. So we're going to cycle through all of this, and it's going to heat up quite a bit pretty quickly. Checking back up on frosting, this is no problem. Once the trees started really gulping into the water, the drainage line is going to work just perfect. Right now, it's flowing at a much higher speed, and that's because we got rid of some of these old liquid reservoirs that were holding 2 and 3 degree polluted water. Now they're all between 15 and 20 degrees, just the way we like it. After what feels like a month of Sundays, we're finally prepared and ready for our first piece of steel. We have all the materials loaded up no matter what we want to refine. We have some beautiful oxygen down here. So I suppose we'll just start off with 40 pieces of steel. Now we have enough lime to go all the way up to 70, but we're going to need some iron in there as well. So why don't we say 40 pieces of iron as well? And while the duplicants are working on that, let's go through the system that we need that first bit of steel for, and that's the gas pump here in the natural gas geyser. Now it's dormant, and we're not even sure how long it's dormant for because we have yet to analyze it. Lucky for us, we have plenty of researchers. But that gas is going to travel via insulated gas pipe because remember the gas comes out of here at 150 C all the way over here to a buffer tank. And then from the buffer tank, we'll go into 2 natural gas geysers. Now here's where I'm going to try something a little different. I don't want this hot polluted water going all over the place, so we're going to take it up by this liquid pump. This liquid pump, once again via insulated liquid pipe, is going to take it all the way over to the polluted water ingest tanks. And the reason why is because it should be minuscule amounts of hot polluted water. But when it mixes with the 5 tons of 15 to 20 degree polluted water, all of that heat should be instantly absorbed and averaged out through here. What that also means is we are going to lessen the demand of polluted water over from frostine. And then all the power being generated by the natural gas generators is going to be fed into this battery, going into this large power transformer. Now right now we have a bunch of 2-strand wire. We'll get around to replacing it. What's even better is it's going to take our duplicants off of the wheel, finally at cycle 225. I mean, even frostine hasn't been on the wheel in 100 cycles. We've got a hydrogen generator as the primary and then some coal as the backup. Speaking of which, it looks like I'm out of coal. It's time to go digging for some more. Lucky for us, there's plenty right over here. On second thought, I figured if we're going to do some digging, we might as well do all the digging at once. It's always a special moment in every series when you create your first steel. And now that we have it, I think we can officially say that we're in the mid-game. We can throw down our steel gas pump here. I don't mind vacuuming this whole place out, so I'm not even going to put an automation sensor on it. I'm going to connect it with power using the conductive wire. We'll upgrade this wire. Actually, we need to do it now. That way we can sweep. Because chances are when we upgraded this wire here, it would drop down in here, and then that would bother us forever and ever. But once all that's done, we'll be able to seal it in, start siphoning off that natural gas. Now, we've got some other junk gases up here. We're going to blame Travis for those, but it'll just take a couple of repairs of the natural gas generators. I'm not too worried about filtering those out. But with all that started, we now have the materials to get started with our ethanol distilleries and petroleum generators. I think we're going to do 2 rows of them. And the line, remember, is going to be here because on this side is going to be a bunch of volcano stuff. And I think we're just going to do something like this. Now remember, once we have automation fully set in here, you never need to come back in. What I'll probably do is leave it just a little hole in here for now, just to be able to get rid of all these other gases, because as the carbon dioxide is produced, it'll push everything up. Now, one great thing about the ethanol distilleries is they don't overheat. So as long as you're not hitting the melting point of the specific ore or metal, you're fine. So we're just going to use cobalt ore for our ethanol distilleries. Oh, I don't like how that insulated piping is going through the middle of this. Let me move this around a little bit. Okay, this will be a little bit better here. While they're working on that, we can start putting in the shipping system for our lumber. Now, since lumber is only falling out between here and here, we can get all of this done with just one conveyor loader per. Something like this. Now, in other setups, we've had to make sure we left room for dirt delivery, but with having the pips in here, we don't need to deliver dirt. All the dirt's going to start and end in here. And then for our rails, we'll use the cheapest and most readily available thing we have, which in this case is cobalt ore once again. I'm going to need to see where the auto sweepers specifically load the lumber into, and that will determine where I'm going to put them here. Of course, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have two in here because we're going to be picking up the polluted dirt as well. These will need to be made out of steel because they do overheat. In fact, instead of being lazy, I'm going to go check our test bench to validate where those positions are, because we may be able to get away with having one auto sweeper to collect the polluted dirt as well. All right, we can see that the polluted dirt comes right out of the stack here. That's good to know. And as far as I can tell, it looks like the auto sweeper needs access to this tile right here. And that's where it's delivering the actual lumber. We can kind of get a clue because it's pointing this way. So with our newfound knowledge, let's head back to our main map. So now we've confirmed that we need access to both this side of the stack and the bottom of the tank. So we are going to need two auto sweepers. I think we're going to sufficiently overlap them though. And that way we can get away with one conveyor loader and one chute. I just realized I was building these conveyor loaders out of steel. That won't be necessary. So we'll replace these with cobalt ore. I was getting ready to close this up and I was like, oh yeah, the polluted water. So I think we're going to extend this down a little bit more using some mesh tiles and just put a polluted water sort of catch right here and that'll be good. But once again, I'm going to want to move these insulated pipes. I've also started the process of shipping all of the lumber. Now, we're sitting at 215,000 units because we've been growing these trees for quite some time. And the way we're dropping them off this time is not by a receptacle, but rather by conveyor chutes. This way, no matter how much lumber we produce, it'll keep flowing across these rails, which also helps keep these ethanol distillers going, especially considering we decided to add buffer tanks of ethanol. Now, what the buffer tanks are going to do is store as much ethanol as they can, and that way, if the ethanol distillers can, they'll keep providing ethanol even if the petroleum generators are not using it all fast enough. Now we need to take a second to talk about the power. I was trying to figure out where we're going to put the power spine in this whole thing, and it hasn't been an easy decision. I was going to put the power spine sort of in here, but because of these volcanoes, we know eventually this is all going to be steam. And after looking at our power requirements that I didn't think were that much, it ends up being that a couple transformers are still pulling too much for one strand of conductive wire. So that means our main power spine is going to have to be heavy watt wire. Question is, how do we get it in here and still have enough room to get around all three of these volcanoes that we eventually plan on utilizing? And I suppose that answer is just going to be squeeze it in where you can. It also means that I'm going to have to use some heavy watt joint plates, and I didn't plan on vacuuming out any heavy watt joint plates because remember, they're going to be able to transfer the heat coming in and out of this room now. And that's where this absolute pain in the butt system comes into play. Now that we have a complete vacuum, thanks to our handy dandy water liquid lock that's probably going to fail just as I'm about to finish, we can deconstruct these tiles and put in our joint plates. Alright, so far our liquid lock is holding. This is good news. One more tile to deconstruct, and then we do one of these numbers. We put a joint plate here, we put a joint plate here, we connect them with some heavy watt wire, put an insulated tile here, and then we've vacuumed in to where those joint plates will no longer be able to transfer the heat. And I think just to be safe, we're going to put heavy watt conductive joint plates because we've gone through the process of upgrading this while still trying to maintain a vacuum, and it's not fun. So to future-proof, we're just going to use the conductive joint plates. Well, that's a bit of trivia that I never really knew. Apparently, to install heavy watt conductive joint plates, you need electrical engineering. Sorry, Naz, but you're going to be stressed out for just a little bit. After more than one issue, we have finally completed this vacuum-sealed heavy watt conductive joint plate. Joint? Now we can release the vacuum from everywhere and rejoice in our success. Well, after another few dozen cycles, we now have a completed power spine. It hugs the very far left side of our map and even goes down here. Now, this is all probably going to change eventually, depending on what we decide to do with these volcanoes here. It does get a smidge complicated over by the petroleum generators. We break off a leg from the power spine. It goes through our vacuum sealed joint plates, connects to both petroleum generators, each with their own battery. I don't know why I decided to set automation on each level. I guess if we ever decide to customize it where I want this one to fire at 65 and this one to fire at 60, I don't know. Needless to say, the petroleum generators are the big cheese when it comes to power generation. The only power consumer that is connected to our power spine is the metal refinery due to that 1.2K worth of power cost. It just makes it easier. We've also disconnected our main power spines here in the colony. This power transformer is running the bottom half of the base. This top transformer is running the top half. And then we have one dedicated power transformer just to run the guts inside of our renewable lumber power facility. So without further ado, it's time to seal this puppy up and see what it can do. Now, I've been running some tests in the background and starting to fill it up with that carbon dioxide. Remember, eventually the carbon dioxide is going to push all this other stuff up and out, and then we'll seal it off completely. You may have been thinking in the background, like, what are we going to do with all that polluted dirt? Well, for now, the auto sweeper is going to load it into these two conveyor loaders and just dump it right here. In fact, we'll probably also drop just a little bit of water in there, and that way it doesn't even off gas. But one of the great things about all this polluted dirt production, remember, that's how we're producing our oxygen. We may never have to use an electrolyzer. Isn't that amazing? Each sublimation station uses 1 kilo of polluted dirt a second. Well, if we get our lumber industry situated well enough, each one of these ethanol distilleries produces 333.33 grams per second. That means each level produces 1 kilo per second, meaning we could infinitely supply 2 sublimation stations for this colony, which, if properly configured, could support 13 dupes. Now, there's going to be some questions that come up. For instance, some folks in the comments are going to say, well, it takes 4 ethanol distilleries to run 1 petroleum generator. Yes, if that petroleum generator was running flat out. It's not. In fact, my guess is that they're going to be running less than 50% of the time, which is going to allow these liquid reservoirs to fill up with ethanol. So at any time the petroleum generator needs to run flat out, it's going to be able to because it's going to have 2 liquid reservoirs full of ethanol. And remember, with 3 ethanol distilleries per petroleum generator, the petroleum generator can run 75% of the time before we'll start seeing an ethanol surplus. And I don't think we're going to get into a situation where these petroleum generators are going to have to run 75% of the time. Another feature we added was I added a couple of gas pumps connected to an atmos sensor, and that way anytime that we want to draw off of this carbon dioxide that is already up to 36 kilos per tile, we're going to be able to. In fact, we're probably going to do that next episode and utilize all that carbon dioxide for our space program. By the way, we already have 11 tons of polluted dirt up here, and that's just from the several cycles we've been sort of testing around and seeing how this is working. I do have a minor concern because the polluted water is coming out at 72 degrees, and this first tank is getting up to about 36 when combining half and half with the water coming over from Frostine. But it's also going through yet another tank, and this tank is still sitting at 25 degrees. If we need to, we can run this water somewhere else or cool it down before we add it to these liquid reservoirs. In fact, I'm sure one day all of the lumber situation will be temperature controlled. Speaking of which, with all the additional polluted water that we have, we may even be able to run a couple of extra trees. The sky's the limit for us. But now that we have this entire power situation figured out, we can go any direction we want. Next episode, though, that direction is spaced to go search for some plastic, because before we can even think about cooling anything, we're going to need some. I hope you enjoyed the creation of our renewable lumber system. I know I did. I can't wait to hear all your comments about what you think of this system and what suggestions that you have. So until then, I'll talk to you soon.